On this video, I would like to do a survey of the Old Testament around 12 periods, a brief survey. And so we begin with the Pre-Patriarchal History, which would be the first period. In this, I'm dating it from 5,000 plus to 2100 BC. Scholars differ as to the exact beginning point. I take a conservative viewpoint, uh, theologically conservative viewpoint, and conservative scholars would say anywhere as a whole. From that point to around 8,000 BC to 2100 BC. During this period, we have Genesis 1 to 11, which we could entitle the beginnings. In that section, there's four movements: creation, chapters 1 and 2, the fall, chapters 3 through 5, the flood, chapters 6 through 9, and the Tower of Babel, chapter 10 and 11. We begin with creation, how that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. He created man, male and female. And then in chapter 2, he talks about the oneness of marriage, that God takes Eve from the rib of man and builds a woman, which is a picture of the intimacy of marriage from the very beginning, with Adam and Eve becoming a type of that. Then we move on to the fall. In chapter 3, the bad fall that happened. Man was innocent, and then when Adam and Eve sinned, there was the shame, the accusations, the fall. Followed then by the results following the fall in the next chapters, in the violence of Cain toward Abel, in Lamech's boastful song, and then the genealogy of chapter 5, where death ensues. Then we have the flood in chapters 6 to 9, where the text describes the reason for the flood, followed by a description of how the Lord saved Noah and his family in the flood. And then we have the Tower of Babel. God had told them, and this is in chapter 10 and 11, to spread. Instead of spreading, they all came together. And so God spread them about by the different languages that suddenly appeared. The second period is the patriarchal period, 2100 to 1840 BC. In this, we go from Genesis 12 to 50, the narrative of Abraham 12 to 25, Isaac 26, Jacob 27 to 36, and Joseph 37 to 50. If there's one movement through all of this, it is the covenant. God promises to bless Abraham, make him a great nation, and then in him all nations would be blessed. And we see that covenant reiterating itself in chapter 13, in 15, where the Lord makes a blood covenant. In chapter 17, if you look, count the stars, your seed's going to be that great, like the multitude of stars. We then see the covenant reiterated to Isaac, and then in 26 to Jacob, as he's on his way to Uncle Laban's, going and coming. And then finally, we have the narrative of Joseph that tells us how Israel ended up in Egypt. So the second section is the patriarchal period. The third period is the period of Israel in Egypt, 1840 to 1440 BC, we have Exodus 1 to 12, the call of Moses, followed by the plagues, and then the Passover. This is followed then by the fourth period, the period of the Exodus and wilderness wanderings, 1440 to 1400 BC, Exodus 12 through the book of Deuteronomy. Exodus 12 to 40, we have the Exodus, we have the Ten Commandments, the law, and the tabernacle. All of that is talked about in Exodus. Leviticus shows priestly worship and what the Lord intended for Israel's worship to look like. Numbers then looks at the wilderness wanderings and how, because of disobedience in not entering the land, they are forced to wander in the wilderness. Then it's the book of Deuteronomy, where we have what I like to call the suzerainty treaty. And in that great book, God says, here's where I brought you. This is what I've done for you. Here's what I want you to do in relationship to me. Here are the curses if you don't, and the blessings if you do, followed by an epilogue. So after that, we have the period of entrance into Canaan. This is 1400 to 1380 BC, and the book of Joshua shows the entrance into the land of Canaan and how the Lord brings Israel into Canaan, a promise that he had made to Abraham. Then we have the period of the judges, which would be the sixth period. Entrance into Canaan is the fifth, followed by the sixth, which is, I'm dating it about 1380 to 1050 BC, the period of the judges. Judges was a period of falling away, of apostasy. All the judges failed for the most part, and we see that in the book of Judges. So it reminds us of what happens even today often, falling away from following the Bible, following the Lord in a lot of ways, even in the churches as we see. Then we go to 1 Samuel 1 to 7. Samuel is the last of the judges. And in that period, we have Ruth, a beautiful little book about the kinsman redeemer, how that Boaz becomes a kinsman redeemer, becomes a type of Jesus Christ in I think, a wonderful way. Then we have the period number 7 of the United Kingdom, 1050 to 931 BC. We have Saul in 1 Samuel 7 to 31, 1050 to 1010 BC, and we see his failure as a king. Then we have David in 2 Samuel, and I'm including a lot of the Psalms, 1010 to 970 BC. David was a good king, but had failures. And we have the great Davidic covenant, 2 Samuel 7, where God promises one would reign on David's throne forever. Then we have the Psalms, a number of them written by King David. Beautiful Psalms. This is followed by Solomon, 1 Kings 1 to 11, 970 to 931 BC. Here we have the Song of Songs. And by the way, Solomon's reign is in that 1 Kings, the first 11 chapters. Then we have the Song of Songs, which is a marriage litany of songs, followed by the Proverbs, which is maxiomatic wisdom, wisdom maxims. And then we have Ecclesiastes, where we have vanity of vanities, says the Kohelet, all is vanity. He tries everything, and old age comes on, and everything proves to be fleeting, to be vain. Then we have the eighth period, the period of the divided kingdom, following the United Kingdom in 931 to 722 BC. Here we have the Assyrian captivity in 722. To bring an end to that period, we have Joel, Jonah, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, and Micah. I like to call it Joim. Joel is about a locust plague, and Jonah shows God's grace upon the Gentiles. Amos is like a rough, I call him a cowboy turned preacher, a rough kind of a guy who really becomes a wonderful prophet of social justice. Hosea, the bad marriage book. He married a lady who became a harlot, and this is a type of what happened with Israel and when she went after Baal worship. Then Isaiah, I call Isaiah the Shakespeare of the Old Testament. He's a wonderful full book of 66 chapters, and there's so much in that book, three major sections, and much about the Messiah, about Christ, I believe. Then we have Micah. I call Micah the little Isaiah. 2 Kings 15 to 18 is a background for Isaiah and Micah. Then we have the period of the surviving kingdom, 722 to 536 BC. We have this ending in the Babylonian captivity in 586 BC. We have Nahum, which is judgment on Nineveh, Zephaniah, dealing with the day of the Lord, Habakkuk, great book about the just shall live by faith, and Jeremiah, the great weeping prophet, and that great new covenant of Jeremiah 31. Lamentations, showing him weeping over Jerusalem. Then there is number 10, the period of the exile, 586 to 536 BC. We have Daniel, Ezekiel, and Obadiah. Daniel deals with Gentile world powers, much about the future. Ezekiel is a prophet living in Babylon, prophesying about the reason as to why Israel went there, as well as looking into the future. Obadiah is the judgment of Edom. So Obadiah deals with that. Then we have the 11th period, the period of restoration, 536 to 400 BC. Exiles return under Zerubbabel in 536 BC. And we see this in Ezra 1 to 6. The temple then is rebuilt. We see this from 520 to 516 BC. And here we have Haggai, Zechariah. Haggai is the exhorter. Zechariah is the visionist. He has a series of visions and sets that forth in his book, encouraging the rebuilding of the temple. Esther is a great book of God's providence in 480 BC, followed by Ezra's return and revival in 458 BC, and we see this in Ezra 7 to 10. Nehemiah's return then in the building of the city of Jerusalem around 448 BC, and then finally the Chronicles, which is an encouragement to rebuilding the temple and temple worship, followed by Malachi, which I call the question and answer prophet. How have we, robbed God? The question in tithes and offerings. So he has these questions with answers. This is concluded by the 12th period, the intertestamental period, from 536 to 135 AD. We have the Persian period, 536 to 331 BC, followed by the Grecian period, 331 to 322 BC, the Ptolemaic period, 322 or 323 to 63 BC, and finally the Roman period, 63 to 135 AD. That's just a rough, quick overview of 12 periods in trying to put the prophets and everything into historical context. What I'd like to do is come back over this and do it in more depth and try to then slowly work our way through.